Hello, welcome back to the Entangled Health Podcast. I, as always, am Madison Murphy Barney, and I host this thing. And I hope you're having an all right week. It's snowing here. I wonder what it's doing where you are. And today we're going to talk about more in depth something I talk about a lot. I realize that I'm often talking about StoryLab sessions, about what happens when you step into the StoryLab. And I just wanted to give some examples of what comes of a StoryLab session when you sit down with me at the Center for Story and Strategy and have one of these sessions, and how it can become a 5 year strategy, among many other things, Northern Star, other things. And so I wanted to demystify that process a little bit and talk about what happens when clients come into those sessions, what they're like, what the feel is like, demystify it a little bit, and make clear just like how impactful 2 to 3 dedicated hours can be on your strategy for years to come. So, um, recently I had a session with a client who they are honoring an anniversary of their organization, and they wanted to record 50 stories for 50 years. And they also wanted to, as they're visioning their next 50 years, like they're looking backwards at 50 years and visioning the next 50 years, they wanted to, yes, record these 50 stories, have an archive. Also, I'll be editing um, 12 of the pieces into shorter segments for them to share out, and then pulling quotes for different projects that they're doing. So it's like a many-fold project. But this all started when they were thinking about, what do we do for 50 years to honor ourselves, our people, our community, and what do we want to like capture in that? And then also, how do we use this to create infrastructure and structure and goals for the years to come? Because they're really using this time to sort of not stop, but pause and reflect, and then also think about who they want to be, their identity, who they serve, who they nourish in the years to come. So we sat down for 2 hours and I walked them through really the crux. Like, there's nothing that organizations and partners that I work with need to plan or really prepare for these sessions, because what I'm trying to do is oftentimes beforehand, I'll ask for certain documents and certain things, like just so that I have a lot of context going in about like a snapshot of where they are. But the questions are really designed and curated to each session to elicit where the organization is, what the challenges you're facing are, where you want to go, and what feels possible, and what gets in the way when you want things to be possible, and what your current relationships and capacity are, and budget, and all of that. So I take all of these, like, let's say, structural things into consideration, and then and ask questions about them and dig a little deeper into that. And I there are times where I've asked folks to, to be like, oh, I need to hear from everybody on every question. But I found now that the best thing to do is just like let folks lead and answer as they see fit, and like build off of each other. And there's so much that I watch the teams that I work with learn about each other in this process. And as challenging as it can be to find a couple hours, like once they do, like what's created saves months and months of work, because we're getting to that clarity, we're getting to that what's possible, all within the constraints and lived realities of what's going on in your organization. I feel like so many um like strategy sessions, or sessions like that, listening sessions, they don't quite get to um take the time to really excavate like what is going on and where the possibilities are within that. I think so often when we think of a strategy session, we think of like overhauling everything for the sake of a strategic plan. And it's like, no, what if we built plans where it's like based on the capacities, capabilities, tools, zones of genius, everything that's in the room, all of the strengths in the room. What if we use all of that to build a plan off of, rather than like imagining and like pulling from outer space? We can pull from what's really going on. So these sessions really pose as I said, like a series of questions that go through different phases. And it's, you know, a wild sort of thing to watch of like now that I've been doing them for a couple of years, to be able to watch organizations I work with still implementing like things from the strategy brief that's created afterward, because after every session, and I'll get more into it, I, compile everything I've learned, and then based on past partnerships and just my knowledge of the field and what's going on and what I've seen others do and what could be possible, I create a brief of like what was said, what was shared, where you want to go, your North Star, and what makes that possible, and whose voices we need to listen to in order to make that possible, and where we can like have, deep listening to community and to your staff and to your organization overall and to your system within what like the capacities and capabilities you have now and with who you have. It's not like hiring a whole new team and creating a whole new program. And if you want to do that, that's great. Like we love that. We love bringing in more geniuses to the cause. But what I'm saying is it's like I understanding what the material constraints are, build a strategy off of that base rather than building one off of what we wish could be true. And sure, there's a you know also space for growth there. It's not just saying you're going to be like this forever, but like what makes sense with where you are to get you to where you want to go, rather than creating a strategy based on like an imaginary scenario. So here we are to pull back the curtain into these story lab processes, and why this like so much of the work that I talk about with you all the time is around deep listening to our communities and to our staffs and to our teams. And it's like would be silly then if my process with partners didn't start with the exact same thing. And it shows like why that deep listening at the front end changes everything that follows. So I like the term story lab because it's, like stepping into the lab, stepping into the place where a lot is possible and different things can be tried and experimented with. And there's a lot of transparency and honesty. And it's so different from a traditional like discovery call or intake process because, these can be standalone sessions. Like a lot of organizations hire me just for this. I hand them the brief afterward and they're off on their own, um, using it and utilizing it for years to come. Like it's that comprehensive and there's that much learning that happens. And so I'm not, as concerned in like how we're going to work together and like these other things that are often a part of an intake process or, discovery calls of like getting to know each other. Like this is more really in depth, really zoned in on where you want to go, who you are, and what's possible with the like resources you have at hand. And the posture of this is the posture of what I'm always doing, which is like, we're not here to arrive at answers. We're arriving with like questions and a framework for listening. So I'm listening the entire time, and those answers and those recommendations and those, I make a lot of, recommendations for next steps. And I also address, part of the Story Lab session is talking about challenges and, talking about challenges. And then I use the wisdom that I have from years and decades of doing this work to then show how other organizations have overcome challenges like that. And I have a coach who says, like we all actually have the same set of problems. They're just packaged in different ways. And so it's a humbling exercise in that too, of just being like, this is a set of problems that is so common. And it looks a unique way to you. So I'll have unique, tailored recommendations for you, but it's also, you can rest assured that anything you're coming up against is something that my clients have come up against many times and we found ways to overcome. So the cool thing about the Story Lab session is it's both like diagnostic and generative. It's about like getting really, really, really clear on what's going on and then also really, really clear on what's possible. And it's really there to assess organizational readiness while also expanding on what feels possible. And so it's not just one or the other. And it's not like the pie's definitely in the sky, but like it's close enough to reach. We're never throwing it so far up that we can never get it back. We're letting the pie be in the sky, letting ourselves feel this sense of possibility, because like why else would we be working in the organizations in the fields we're working in if we didn't feel possibility? But at the same time, it's this like rooted in reality so that it's not like you get handed this thing and you're like, that seems great for a different organization with X amount more funding or a whole team or ability to hire up. It's like, no, can you actually do based on where you are and taking that into consideration? And there's like this magic that's created in this dedicated, protected time for imagination. And I often say to folks as we're going through the questions of the Story Lab session of like, maybe this seems a little like one or two of the questions seem a little bit obvious, but sometimes it's like that core question about the work that we think is obvious that then I hear teams, because of course, like there are other team members in the room, so they're, like responding to each other and speaking with each other and watching them learn from each other about how they view the work and something that's available in one side of things that might not be available on the other, but how could they come together? And so it's this de-siloing process of getting everybody out of just their role for a second and talking about, yes, the organization as a whole, but also talking with other folks who they, work alongside and collaborate with, but don't always have the chance to just like sort of stop and talk about the root of what they're doing and the core of their work. And, and so often these, folks, of course, bring me in often when, they're thinking about how storytelling can inform their strategy, how they want to bring forth more community stories and things like that. But that's not the only thing. Like I've done many just story lab sessions with organizations that don't have huge plans for like a big storytelling initiative. It's rather that the listening to them is creating this strategy that they can utilize that, yes, reflects deep listening to the community, because in my mind and in my practice, all strategy is based on wisdom of the community, that community including the folks who are working at your organization. But at the same time, it's like it's not just like these aren't just sessions to look ahead at, a storytelling initiative. It's a session that helps your organization build out a strategy in any direction you want to go and brings in deep listening at those phases to make sure that that strategy is rooted in the knowledge of your community, the knowledge of your staff, the strengths that you have, so that it can be that impactful strategy that feeds that healthy ecosystem of a strategy with impact that gets attention of donors and funders and decision makers and has communication and advocacy built in and all of that stuff that I talk about all the time when it comes to story driven strategy. But these definitely aren't just for organizations that want to have storytelling initiatives. They're for organizations that overall, just want a sense of like their path forward in building community trust, their path forward in effective programming, their path forward in reaching the communities they care about, in so many other avenues, rather than just like thinking of like a straightforward, say, like oral history program or story collection or story trainings. It's so much more than that. And, so often organizations get asked, what stories you have, but not what those stories could do, what those stories are able to do and to bring us towards and to illuminate and show us. So, um, these sessions have taught me so much about listening, and I really listen to, one lens of like, where is the organization now? Where are you all now? What's going on? What's standing in the way? What's facilitating things? What institutional knowledge is there and shared? And that's why it's so great to have folks from different areas of the organization come together in these. And it also, like what narratives or stories drive the organization. There's often these like founding narratives or guiding narratives, and it's great to like spend some time investigating those too and hearing about them and seeing, what the overall picture is of um of the organization and the folks who come to me. And, another part of that deep listening is that central question of what can you actually do? And again, it's not the like limiting and making small, but it's the what's possible. There's that really famous quote. It's like, do what you can with what you have from where you are. I think I got that right. And I don't know who said it, but it's kind of that of like, what can we start now without getting too distracted in the what we wish was possible, but what is possible, and how do we like take meaningful incremental steps in that direction without getting sidetracked about like um there's another quote. I guess I'm just going to spill quotes today. And I'm pretty sure it was maybe Bill Gates who said like, we really underestimate what we can do, or we really overestimate what we can do in a year and really underestimate what we can do in 5 or 10 years. And so it's also that of being like properly estimated on like what we can do in certain periods of time so that we can look towards that big change in 5 to 10 years, but can really also, start with what's possible now so we can get to that big change in 5 to 10 years. Another thing that is so important that I deeply listen to in these story lab sessions are, what resources exist? Relational resources, monetary resources, team resources, capacity, intern resources, just everything of like what's there, like what can we dedicate to what you all want and where you all want to go, what's here. And like I when I was little, I used to in the summer do an outdoor theater group. Shout out to Sleepy Hollow Summer Theater in Bismarck, North Dakota. And the first play I was in, I was maybe 9 and I was in Peter Pan. And that was my first experience, one, in a play, and two, like building sets and that type of creation. And, prior to that, I had always known that I was someone who is scrappy and like I can always make something out of what I have. And a lot of that comes from my dad. And just like, I don't know, I feel like having an indigenous upbringing is to be scrappy. Like, you just like, are taught to see things in a way of like all the different ways that you can utilize things and put them together and always figure it out. And it's one of my favorite character traits of myself, especially having known that I inherited it from my ancestors. And so when I think about like the organizations I work with too, there's so much beauty in the like scrappiness and what can be pulled together with the tools we have now and how that can just alleviate and cause stress and cause so much relief. Like so often during these story lab sessions, I feel people in the room just sort of like exhale and like decompress because it's this sense of like they thought this was going to be so hard. It was, like seemed like it was going to be so hard to do all of these things. And then we think, well, we have all of these resources now, and this can be used more efficiently in this way. And I'm somebody, I think it also comes with scrappiness that like I don't want to see anybody's, especially all of the geniuses that work at your organization, like we don't want their time and energy and resources wasted. So how can we like take stock of them and then utilize them in the most like caring and beautiful and like generative ways that like give back to the folks who are sharing their genius all the time? And with those resources, I also, tend to have conversations, especially in the brief I send later, about the cost of not investing in this type of infrastructure that builds trust and builds community relationships and creates a strategy that can actually be implemented with buy-in from the community and the staff. And those costs tend to end up really, really big in times of personnel and time and burnout and all of these things that happen when we like stop orienting our work towards the North Star of serving the communities that we're in. And so this isn't like meant to be a scary uh part, it's not like a finger wagging or anything like that, but it's just getting really real and honest about all that's being like, let's say, wasted in terms of time, energy, and resources, and where if that's harnessed and put towards these initiatives, like so much else becomes possible. Um, and then, as I said, there's that phased approach too of the like what can happen now versus what's possible with future resources. And um and then I want to learn again because I'm inherently nosy, like how do things actually get done here? And so there's questions that get to like what are the decision making structures and workflows and where can this integration happen of new things and um even down to the nitty gritty of like documentation and celebration and all of these things. And like it gets to this point so that like whatever comes next and whatever's possible in the brief. And like that's what I love about the brief is like small parts can be utilized at a time. It's like little bits by bits. It's not just suddenly like you have to start here and end here and there's no in between steps. Like it's all about the in between steps and what's possible now. And as we all know, like as work years go on and months go on, it's just like there's these little windows of opportunity. So how can we have a plan in place and like a brief and a strategy in place where it's like when there are those windows, we know what to do and we don't spend that time of the window being open trying to like calculate or concoct like what should be true, but we already know what's true and we know where we want to go as a team and as an organization, so we can just like bite off these small things as capacity becomes available. And then there's that inevitable pivot at some point in, right? And it's that bridge of we go from where you are to where you could be. And there's that importance of reflecting back where we what we've heard before moving forward, and then we get into that vision casting of what it would look like for this to be happening and what might become possible and who might be involved. And this is like the really exciting part. And as I said, it's like the pie in the sky, but not so far up that we can't watch or like grab it and access it. And like how when you have this type of like cyclical um process that feeds itself and the community feeds, and it just like is this really healthy ecosystem of impactful story driven strategy, is that like more and more becomes possible each time we go through that cycle of visioning and deeply listening to the community and the teams, and then creating strategy based off of that, and then using that strategy to increase impact, increase um like comms and advocacy efforts, because we have all these beautiful stories and all this community wisdom. And then, funders get excited about that. And it's that cycle I talk about all the time, that vision casting makes sure that every time you complete that cycle and go back to the beginning, you're getting closer and closer because you have more resources, you have more buy-in, you have more social proof. So you're just like more and more becomes possible each time when we let this cycle feed itself and be healthy. And, yeah, and then I do this sort of weaving process of all that I've seen that's possible, all that I've seen that wants to be possible, and not just seen but heard as well, and weave it and braid it together into this brief that captures the vision in actionable terms, with the resources you have now, with what's possible. And there are goal statements that everyone is aligned around, and specific recommendations to identify challenges. As I mentioned, like all of us have the same problems in different packages, so it's just a matter of supporting you through what I know other has worked at other organizations, so that you don't have to spend time in the weeds, in uncertainty. That fog can clear and you just have the clarity of like, this is what we need to do in our context, we know us best, and this problem in our context means this and this need to be done. And there's a real, like, as I was talking about that ecosystem, there's like an evergreen principle to this, and that's something I love about it, which is why, as I mentioned, I have partners who've used the same document for over 5 years and continue to grow and build their impact, is because it's designed for longevity and not just the immediate project, but like that deep knowledge of your organization and the ability to go back and listen as things change and design from there. Like you learn that through this process so that you can continue to do that. And there's that institutional knowledge and that embodied wisdom of how to go through this cycle in a really generative and responsible way. And something that we know is that, especially if a story lab session is being used for a storytelling initiative, we know that stories as assets are evergreen, and the stories never expire. And so they can be used over time. And so it's like one of those things that you invest the time and energy in once, it can be used over and over again, and builds that goodwill and builds that interest and builds that capacity. So you can continue to make these strategies that really serve your community as your community ebbs and flows and changes and ages and evolves. Um, and yeah, and so that's how this document becomes this living document that you can pick up at any time and really implement parts of and understand its context and reintroduce new versions of it, not by rewriting it, but just being like, oh, in this context, this is something we can do here now that we're doing things this way or that way. And um, and so yeah, so I just think these sessions are like a magic trick almost. Like I just love them so much. And as I've shared in previous episodes and in some of my writing, is that, my zone of genius is really in that uncertain and really in that mess. And I love the the uncertainty and the mess and just all of that fact finding, and then finding the threads throughout and finding the possibility throughout. And like that's just something that, I've done my whole life, and it's like inherent in me as a gift, and that I love doing is I know that like so many of the clients I work with, tense up when they think about uncertainty or not knowing or asking these big questions, but like that's where I thrive. And in doing that alongside you and almost really dueling you through that process, so much can emerge because you don't have that fear, that tensed up of worried about saying I don't know, or what might happen, because like that's not the point. The point is just this deep exploration, and then my job is to sort of sort through it and do that braiding and that clarity and that weaving. And so it's not, you don't have to worry about that. You just get to sit back and answer these questions and then receive the brief, and then but and then I of course remain a resource through various channels of working together. Some folks do a StoryLab session and then I come on for a retainer, and help them do all the implementation, or others join story hours, which is twice a month call where folks are doing implementation and just they can get their questions answered, and there's also Slack support with that. So there's of course like like so many organizations I work with can just take this brief after the story lab session and run with it on their own, and then others really want support along the way, and of course I'm there for that. Like I'm not just gonna leave you to it, and that's what I'm here for. And that's the part that I also love is redefining that clarity and living out and implementing that clarity along the way. And so for organizations, that it really, I think of it as like a vessel that holds, forward momentum and and possibility and reality, and just holds all of this beautiful work that you can do, and shows, what's possible when you have these proactive approaches to story and narrative and strategy. And then, it aligns storytelling with the mission, not just marketing, but with, this ecosystem that I've talked about so many times is really upheld through beginning with this anchor. Really think of it as that anchor to any project that comes from it. It's what holds it down, it's what's give it stability so that everything else is possible. And then of course for communities, they really benefit when organizations take this time to like pause and reflect. And it's not that long of a pause. I mean, 2-3 hours is long in the course of a day, but when we think of a 5-year impact, or like what can come of this, like it's not, it's not so long. It's well worth the stop. And so our communities benefit so much when we do this, because we're operating from clarity and from visibility and from having taken the time to really get a sense of what's possible, so that the things we offer them are sustainable, and the programs become more community driven, and there's just like so much health and care and reciprocity that comes from a process that's built out of like the energy of the anchor, and then also the realities of what's going on at your organization. And um yeah, and so some signs that you might be ready for a story lab session are, if you're in an organizational transition, if you're in a strategic planning moment or leading up to one, if you have this felt sense of, oh, we're not telling our story well, or our identity is unclear, or funders really aren't paying attention, or decision makers aren't quite getting, all that we're offering them in our annual reports and things like that, or if you're celebrating milestones or reaching milestones and you want to use them as a like sort of a landmark to like stop and think and reflect and plan forward, then these sessions are just like the perfect time to do that. And it could even be also like right now we're, it's pretty early in the year. So it's like, do you want to have one at the beginning of the year to look forward for the rest of the year, so you're on solid ground? Or is it, midway through the year as a tune-up or a checkup? So all of these milestones and moments of change and thresholds are really beautiful places to introduce this type of session, and to get clarity and to be able to move forward with clarity that could, as I mentioned, sustain you for years to come, half a decade to come. And so to recap, there's it's a 2 to 3 hour session of genuine listening, and all you have to do is come with, a pen or pencil if you like to, make notes like that. But you don't have to take notes. It's just more so, jotting down ideas that you want to share with the group and things. I take all of the notes. I do all of the facilitation and the tech and everything. So you really just have to come and answer questions and talk with your colleagues and, um, have that time to imagine and think forward and plan so that you don't feel sort of stuck in the way things have been, even if the way especially if the way things have been aren't aligned with how you and your team know you want them to be and know how they could be. And, like I certainly can't claim that a story lab session is magic, but I also can't say that it's like not magic because so much happens in it and it does create these conditions for transformation. And the strategy that emerges from understanding is just so, it's not a strategy that's ever going to be put on the shelf because it's like a living, breathing strategy that you know how to implement and is designed just exactly for your people, their wisdom, and where they want to go. And so I'm so glad to have this sort of pulling back the curtain episode on the Story Lab session. And it's one of the the great loves of my life are these sessions. And I can barely articulate how much I love having them with clients and what comes out of them and just how wildly different I see organizations the before and the after and what becomes possible with what we already have. Again, it's not this like huge overhaul, it's what you have now. So much is possible with that and it doesn't take, a massive change to make really large shifts in progress. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you're warm and that you have a great rest of your week. And I look forward to being back together in a few weeks' time. And you can, of course, send me an email or a message. All my information is in the show notes if you want to book a story lab session. I obviously can't recommend them enough. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have after listening to this and really, really excited to be in the story lab with you and your team, really digging in and getting into the nitty gritty of all of the ins and outs of what might be possible. All right, take care.